Try not to say no that much. And if it's something like, if they say, can you shoot architecture? I usually am very honest. I say, I don't have a lot of experience,. But I'd like to give it a go. And then develop a community of support, be it like-minded artists, be it other photographers, designers, writers, whatever. Maybe they don't do the same thing you do, but can critique your work and meet on a monthly basis.
Welcome to the Creative Chats podcast with Mike Brennan. Welcome to another episode of Creative Chats. It's the podcast for artist makers and content creators where we talk about creativity, the creative process, and story. I'm your host, Mike Brennan. I'd love to invite you to stop by dailycreativehabit.com. I have created all sorts of resources for you because I truly believe that when you create, we all win. So I want to see as many of you stepping into your creativity fully, closing the gap between where you are and where you want to be. And I want to help you do that. So I've created resources like the Daily Creative Habit Journal. I've written a book, Make Fun a Habit. I have all sorts of free resources like this podcast and a Facebook group called Daily Creative Habit. Also, the paid membership for Daily Creative Habit, where we get together with like-minded creators, all pushing in the same direction, encouraging each other, and saying we're going to show up every single day to create something to get our work out there into the world. So if you would like to be a part of any of those things, again, stop by dailycreativehabit.com or simply visit my website, which is mikebrennan.me. Today's conversation is a great one. It is with a photographer who is really more than that. He's a storyteller, and he uses photography. And his name is Jason Gardner. We have a great conversation tracing his journey and his experience through photography, through storytelling. And he does some pretty amazing work that centers around the ritual and festival of Carnival and traditional folkloric type of community celebrations. He has two books. One is coming out actually very shortly. And we talk about the balance between passion projects like that, as well as a lot of the client work that he does with big clients like Con Edison, HBO, TED Talks, and so on. And he is a great example of making sure that you lean into your passions, your strengths, pursuing those things because they inform all of your work. And so even though your creative expression may not be photography as you're listening today, be sure that you apply the specific encouragement and inspiration and principles that he shares today, because trust me, your business and your creativity, your creative expressions will be better for it. So without further ado, here is my creative chat with Jason Gardner. Well, Jason, welcome to the Creative Chats podcast. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you. It's awesome. Great to be here.
So I'm looking forward to diving into today because I don't think I've had too many photographers actually on the podcast. And I love to just talk to a variety of creative people and dive into just why they do what they do and how they started and process things, like all that stuff. And so I'm looking forward to our conversation as we peel back the onion a little bit on some of those things for you.
Yeah, rock on. I'm all about peeling back the onion. Good stuff.
Yes. And I always love to just say, turn it back to the guest. You're at a party and someone asks you about yourself. They're like, oh, who are you? What do you do? Like, what is your sentence, your go-to sentence for that?
Well, I say I'm a photographer, but the thing that the stopper is what I say, that I photograph the why, not the what, right? Taking a page from, I don't remember the guy's name, the author, but that's my business photography. And in my sort of personal photography, I've been doing a 15-year plus project on documenting very traditional rituals and culture with respect to the ritual of Carnival. And in general, Carnival in the States, we think of maybe Mardi Gras in New Orleans, maybe Rio or these things. But I've been sort of literally peeling back the onion layers of this other type of culture. It's very small villages all throughout Europe, West Africa, Caribbean, et cetera, of these very ancient rituals that are happening in modern day.
Yeah, that's amazing. So how did you actually find out about these rituals and like what drew you towards those out of all
Yeah,
things
the
that you could be?
origin story,
Yeah,
just like
yeah.
comics. Yeah, you want the origin story. Well, I've been a photographer for 20 years, and when I started, when I was based in New York, I'm now based in Paris with back and forth to New York. When I started about 20 years ago, I mean, things were different. It was digital was just starting, if not, it hadn't started yet, really. And being a photographer was a very difficult thing. And in the beginning, when I first started, I'm self-taught, so I kind of talked to everyone I knew. Tried to get just intern with photographers, swept their floor just to talk to them about photography, look at work. And the first thing that I got was, as like in writing or anything, photograph what you love, right?
Mhm.
And my origin story before becoming a photographer was that I went to school for marketing, and in the 90s, I worked for a packaged goods company for a couple of years in like a marketing assistant. And then I worked for an internet company in the mid to late 90s, and it was growing like crazy. And I was I had a suit and I had managing a team, but inside I was kind of miserable because I wasn't
Mhm.
fulfilled, right? And then when I hit my mid 20s crisis, the quarter life crisis, it's kind of like, what am I going to do? And the company grew a lot and then it didn't grow. And I found myself without a job at 25 and saying, like, what am I going to do? I have these other four offers from internet companies who said, yeah, just come work for me because we need people who have any experience. And I decided to not do that. And I had a friend who was living, working overseas, and he said, I'm going to go backpacking around the world. You should join me for some of it. Short story is that I did. I was supposed to go for 3 months, and I then went for 6, and I was gone for 2 years straight. And through that, when I was backpacking around the world, and it's a little bit of Europe, but it was largely Middle East, Southeast Asia, India, Indonesia, through Australia, Papua New Guinea, New Zealand, all these places. I came back and I kind of said, okay, what now? You gaze your navel for a couple of years and had some great experiences, but what now? And I kept on coming back to photography. I had this little, it was a point and shoot film camera. I think it was a Konica Z Up, which is now defunct. But and I looked at the photos and I said, gee, do what you love, right? Follow a dream. And the classic thing is do what you love and it's not work. Of course that's not true, but
Yeah.
I kind of said, Let's just try that. I've got zero risk right now. I might as well give it a go." And so I had to basically, when I started out, I had to learn not only sort of compositionally and formally photography, and not only kind of how to run a business, but the kind of business of photography, right? And then the third thing is whenever I did get an assignment, sort of translating what the client's wishes were photo wise into the final sort of product or archive of images. And that was an evolution in learning and constantly is. And we'll get back to that in a minute. But so when I started, I think that my first year in photography was 2003, after kind of mucking about a little bit. I started shooting musicians and music, right? Because that was one of my first loves and passions. Not only as an audience member, but I played jazz, when I was in high school and college, not professionally, but music was always part of my life. And I started photographing, local musicians, independent musicians, and this is back in 2003 and four when actually some musicians had money because labels had money because there's no streaming. If you can remember that far back, not
Yes.
you, but the audience. And so, I started with a local musician, then I started photographing bigger musicians, and I got a gig shooting occasionally for World Music Magazine. Then I got a few covers. I started shooting more prominent musicians like Manu Chao and Bob Dylan, Isaac Hayes, and Jim James, My Morgan Jacket, and all these started getting to some momentum. And as I showed the work to other art directors, those not in the music business and curators and stuff, to see how I could expand my business, they said, "This is great, but I'm only interested in these photos because the people are famous," right? So I kind of felt like personally I was getting to a wall, and they said, "We want to see a body of personal work that you have a personal investment in that you want to show and these things." And I thought about it and I thought, okay, I love to travel. I love music. All my travels, people say go to Brazil. Let's go to Brazil. Like it was almost that simple. I went to Brazil thinking I would do a project on traditional musicians. And the preparation for that before, because I'd never been there, didn't speak very much Portuguese at all. I talked to also anyone I would talk to, anyone who would listen, Brazilians, musicians, people who've been to Brazil once. And then I started talking to more ethnomusicologists. About 3 to 6 months before I left, I had a big, research run, and a lot of people told me who were in the know, well, you could try going to Rio, you go to Bahia as well, two very well-known areas in Brazil for music, but those are very well known. You should consider going to Recife in the Northeast. That's in Pernambuco, which is a northeastern state north of Bahia. And I did. I ended up going there, and they all said, "Well, if you go there, look up this one person and look up this other person." It was a small scene, but I met a lot of them relatively quickly. And to be honest, being a foreigner with a camera gave me access probably that I wouldn't have had if I was a local, right? So I landed there the first time, I think 2004 in the off season, October, November, and I connected with a couple of musical and cultural groups and did some photos, portraits, and kind of practices and behind the scenes a little bit. And we looked at it after a few weeks, and they said, you have a decent archive, you've done some things, but you have to come back during Carnival because that's when all the music happens. So I said, okay. And 3 months later, I went back for a month, right? So, in fact, I didn't go for the carnival that you think of, the big, huge street parties, massive amount of people. That is true, and it's very difficult to do photographic work, both journalistic and portrait work, because it's just so much and everyone's busy. So I tended to go to the weeks before, the semanas de pré in Portuguese, meaning the weeks in advance. And that's where I did my advance work in Carnival. I kind of let loose and just kind of shot whatever came. And I sort of did a deep intensive there, and then realized that I really scratched the surface. And then so the next year I went back for Carnival, and it ended up being a good thing because you escape the New York winters for a month. And for me,
Yeah.
commercially, it ended up being that January, February tend to be a little slower. So it's okay, put that away and then go focus on personal work. It was a short time to do that. And so what happened was that in this case, I kind of kept on returning to this one place. I went back total of 5 visits over 10 years, 8 years. And that's 8 years of shooting. And after, it was an interesting concept because most carnival photographers, they sort of parachute in for a few days, you never see them again. But I showed myself as a documentarian coming back and seeing the same people and going to the same communities and showing some photos. I printed some small basic photos to hand out just as a thank you for kind of sharing their culture with me. And a lot of people said to me, or a few people said, "Oh, you have a nice archive, but you're missing something. Come back next Saturday and I'll show you something." They took me deep in the favela. They said, "You can't come this alone. You have to go." And we started seeing ceremonies and really backroom stuff. So they somehow connected with, they saw me as this sort of bridge between their culture that they wanted to show, they're proud of, and that sort of outside world. And so after probably the third time, and as my Portuguese got better, I started learning more about what the significance of the thing that I was photographing. I realized I probably had a book in my hands, and 2013, I published "A Flower in the Mouth," which is about this ritual and this very less known but highly cultural area, not only the city but the countryside, which is the cane cutting region of the state of Pernambuco, called "A Flower in the Mouth," right? And so that's a long-winded way to say, I started becoming a bit of a carnival photographer. And the years I couldn't go when I was based in New York, years I couldn't go to Brazil, I started going to, well, what's it like in my own country? I went to Louisiana, not just Mardi Gras in New Orleans, but Cajun country, 3 hours in, right? And it's very, very different carnival. I went to Trinidad, Tobago. I went to Dominican Republic. I started kind of exploring some other sort of parallel carnivals when I could. And then flash forward 2016, when my wife and I moved to France, because she got a job and I'm freelance. I said, why not? Let's give it a go. And I started saying, okay, what's carnival like in Europe? And realizing that now that the carnival's the sort of origins was in Europe and kind of it radiated outward with colonialism, with slavery, all these things. And so I kind of opened up a whole other world, and that's kind of where I ended up publishing the second book, which has just come out February of this year in the States, and it's called "We the Spirits." We'll get to that at the end.
Wow. Yes.
So a
I,
lot of stuff. Sorry.
no, no, it's great because, I'm sure looking back, it's easier to explain it in a way that it just seems like one thing naturally flows into the next, and it's just this kind of sequential thing that happens. So much of the stuff, it sounds like, happened through you following your curiosity, and then also probably relationships, right? Meeting people and them opening up all the doors and things. Were there certain like opportunities that you think were ones that were breakthrough moments maybe that really
Yeah.
helped level you up? And if so, what were
Totally,
those?
totally. You nailed it, Mike. You really, I think you went to the core of sort of the spaces that were lacking in what I just said. The two things I'd like to say are, yes, you're totally right that it seems like on the outside how I just said that like this natural flow, but the reality is that's rocky. Like you never know what you're going to do, right? But to some extent, the consistency of returning back super helped a lot to gain access and to go deeper within one place. And it provided for a project that not many people had seen before. Everyone has seen the sort of AP news feed of these like the one shot, like it's spot news, like the that's like beautiful or someone's sweating and bikini and feathers and it's gorgeous. But to get down and gritty into the relationships of the people who are documenting and the gatekeepers of that culture, that's it's called in New Orleans called culture bearers, right? The people who said, "Oh yeah, I'll show you something. Now that I think you're cool, like let's go in this unmarked door and down this alleyway." But it's also true that the glue in between the years, right? I didn't just kind of put it in an archive and forget about it. I talked to people about it. I tried to meet with art directors and people who helped me edit the work and helped me conceive of the work. An outside view of your own work. People have never been to this place before, who don't can't feel what the heat of the carnival is, but they have a good expert eye. Or even you tend to show it to people non-experts, right, and see what they're. So you kind of have two different levels of feedback cycle, which helps to shape the work, right? Because to some extent, when I first started, I shot everything, and then as I kept on going back, um, it's less of an onion, but more like a nautilus shell. You're kind of like circling back to the same thing, but you're kind of going deeper, deeper, or you're going outward, depending on how you see it. And so, started people saying, well, okay, I want to see more portraits, or I would like to see more about the place, sense of place, or more details, or more of this, more of that, or less of this, or less of that. And so that's helpful. The breakthrough moments happen often, and in the process of actually, when I thought I had a book, I realized that I needed to. The state of the book publishing world at the time, and still is now, is that it's unclear with you if you publish it yourself or go with the traditional publisher. There's two different roads, right? And I decided to raise the funds in advance of deciding that, right? So I did a Kickstarter, and it forced me to edit the work in a certain way and think about the audience of this work in a certain way, because you always have your first degree of separation, that people know, like, and trust you, or know, like, and trust your work that would support it. But then you have to really access the second and third cycle. People who don't. The second is like people who you might know them once, you met them at a party, or you did a shoot for them once, but you don't know them so well. You don't know where they're from, or their children's name, or their favorite color, or whatever. Um, uh, and then the third cycle is like people who can barely recognize their name, right? Or maybe don't even recognize their name. So it's like, how do you address all three of those sort of levels? And then it made me think a little bit about, well, who would buy this book that doesn't know me, right? Who would buy it? And I'd be okay, like people who love music, people who love culture, people who've been to Brazil, people who are from Brazil, living in the States. I had a list. And then how do you speak to them? And then also it's very challenging to pre-sell a book based on a concept, and they're not seeing it, they're not holding it. And so it becomes, how do you put together a package on a platform with the right amount of images, maybe a little video, of course, some story about it, some behind the scenes to show that it's legit, that's moving forward. And I'm sort of glossing over a lot of details, but just to give an idea for your listeners, that's the kind of things I was thinking about. Another breakthrough moment, which made me say, okay, I'm going to publish this book now, was that in that process of sort of showing it around, I'd connected with the director of Lincoln Center, who was involved with the cultural presentations in a certain area. And he had been to Recife before. He knew one of the groups that I photographed. And I actually sat down for coffee to say, can I, do you mind if I just let's figure out a title? Because I know you're very good at taking like disparate cultures and kind of making a title that would or resonate with the home audience. And it was just that. And at the end of the meeting or some months later, he's like, look, I think I'm doing a grant to bring one of your groups over here for the first time ever. And then it eventually became, I want you to participate in this. I said, okay, I'll probably submit a couple photos for the brochure and my name will be on it and I'll be a guest and that's great. He's like, no, 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 I want you to do a solo show at Lincoln Center the day before and I want you to do a presentation and a print. So I said, okay, that's when I'm going to launch my book. The challenge was that was 3 months lead time. And to produce a book in 3 months it's quite a sprint, right? So
Yeah.
that made me say, okay, I have the funds. I'm not going to do it traditionally. I'm going to do it myself. And I have this sort of pipeline of team of people who I can work with that as a designer, a pre-press person, and a professional photography book publisher, printer. Then let's make that happen. So it kind of, yeah, it was, and on another level, I was some luck. Because when I told you about the years, I started shooting in 2004. When I was finishing up around 2010 and 12, Brazil as a country was coming up on the world stage. You had the World Cup, you had the Olympics, and you had economically, they were becoming a world power much more than they had been in previous years. So there's a lot more attention given to Brazil as just a general force that there was previously. So I kind of rode that wave a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing when you have those connections and you have those prompts that you lean into and you're like, okay, seems like the right next step. I'm just going to keep going for this. And then relationships appear, opportunities kind of come. And it's that whole thing of like, when the student is ready, the teacher appears kind of thing, right? Like,
Yeah,
you're
that's
learning
definitely true. And
yeah, you're learning all this, you're going through all this. One of the things too, that I noticed that you kind of referenced, and I'd love to just pivot a little bit into this in terms of like you being, photographer, but also creative business owner.
right.
I'm sure that your experience being a marketer sets you up nicely because even in you talking about like knowing your audience and kind of defining that and the process for you to say, okay, I need to get my book out there before people, I'm sure that helped inform that, right? Have you seen how that's helped you in other ways in terms of, starting, launching, and maintaining your business with a marketing background?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when I do more business and marketing shoots, I think clients really appreciate the fact that, as I mentioned before, I hinted at, I kind of have both right brain and left brain going on, right? So I can get creative, but I can also read a creative brief and read a spreadsheet. I can figure out what the business needs are. If I'm doing just headshots of a firm, and you have to have some emotional intelligence as well, meaning, okay, who's hiring me to do the headshots? It's probably a marketing person or an office manager or a head of business. But the person walking in the door, they may not have had the same buy-in to do the portrait as the person who hired me. So I have to kind of immediately connect with them and understand where they're at and read the room, so to speak, very quickly to be able to gain their trust, at least even to in the 5, 10, 15, 30 minutes that we have to get the very best out of them. And to have our interests aligned. Like my goal is to make you look the best, right? And to make it as painless as possible for those who are shy, right? All those things roll up to being a good sort of service provider for the clients that I have, right? But often people like the fact that I have a marketing degree from Cornell and I can kind of do the business side, but also be creative. And so like the creative side for business, for photography, I'm always asking, why are we doing this? What's the why? Like it's not about, oh, we need this photo of this pen, but like what's the use case where people are going to buy this pen, right? Is it the fact that it writes really well? Is the fact that it looks beautiful? Is the fact that, I don't know. I mean, And largely that's in the soft services, in the sort of services. Or if I'll say, okay, someone will say, a company will say, we need photos of our CEO, we need headshots for, and I say, okay, well, is there anything else you would need? Since we're together, could we, you know, develop what else you could use? And I said, well, maybe we could do more editorial type photo shoot as well at work. Maybe if he's a factory owner, then the factory behind. Maybe if he's a real estate broker, then the neighborhood that he specializes in, right? Because I've found that editorial type photography, besides your typical headshot, your portrait with a blank background, two lights, hair light, side light, key light. Um, when you have photos that tell stories a little bit more, it actually helps to get more press, right? So like connecting the creative with the business need, right?
Yeah.
And often now a big trend with photography is, yes, we do the baseline of what we need, but we do archive shoots, right? Even if it's a mini half day or full day, whatever, you create a bunch of images for different uses: social media, email blast, website, and also, presentations, right? So all those have different size, needs, platform, horizontal, vertical, square, small, big, that kind of thing. Even with entrepreneurs, you have your buttoned up headshot, and then you have your kind of a little bit more informal for like maybe speaking engagements, something a little bit more interesting. So it becomes, what are we doing and why are we doing it? What do you need to say as a business organization or creative entrepreneur? And then when you dig into it a little bit more, being creative with photography, and you can see that, what I tell people is that a lot of the work happens before any buttons are pressed, before any machines are kind of, I'm not paid by the 1/25th of a second for the time that I press the
Yeah.
button. We all have the same tools, but it's how you use them. You know, I sometimes push my clients, even the ones who are creative, like let's say like a musician. I get a lot of, oh yeah, I just want cool photos. I just want something groovy, man. Like, okay, I get that, but what does that mean to you? Because I don't know what's in your head, in your world, until you express it. And even musicians are not very sometimes visually sort of fluent. They're orally fluent, like musically, sound wise. And so I'll say, okay, send me, in the very best example, I'll say, put together some images, make a mood board, send, something that's even just things that are going around your head or what you'd like to see, and then send it to me. And if they can't do that, I say, send me some tracks from your next album. Send me photos that you like. Send me photos you don't like and why. Anything to get closer to what's in their head. And I had one musician say, oh, well, I look through magazines. I don't know. I can't figure out what photos I like. I don't know. And I said, okay, don't worry about it. Just send me 5 album covers that you like. And then he sent that to me in 10 minutes because that's the language that he spoke, right?
Mhm.
And that was his visual vocabulary, and he didn't even know it, right? And so for that guy specifically, he was a blues musician and sort of roots. And I was like, well, is it urban? Is it rural? What is it? Is it edgy? Is it soft? Like, what is it? And he ended up sending me, if you know the 70s black and white, the band shot when they're all looking directly at camera. It's a very famous shot. It's shot upstate in Beacon or something like that. And I said, okay, like I'm deriving from that you want something rootsy, maybe not black and white, not that urban, but something funky, kind of thing. And he ended up saying, well, I'm going to be with my bandmates. So we're going to I live in Gowanus, Brooklyn, and I don't want to go too far because it'll lose their attention. So I said, great, why don't we take our bikes a week before? Let's go location scouting. And so we went and we found 5 or 6 walls because he said, we really have to know what we're doing, because if we're sort of like casting about for that, then they'll see it and they'll sort of like just lose interest. So, we took an afternoon or an hour and we just went biking around the neighborhood, and I had my camera and he just posed just basically. And we had 8 or 10 locations, and I sent that to his label and they pre-approved 5, and then we're set. We had a plan. So it becomes like taking this creative stuff, what's happening around here, understanding that the band members didn't want to do so much improvising. They had a short time to get them all together, understanding the creative stuff and kind of focusing it down to a plan.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of strategy involved, I think, that people don't realize. And I love how you perfectly described all that, and even how You use the term visual vocabulary. That's something that I've referenced as well, especially when I do graphic design and I'm working on logos for clients and things. And it's people who aren't used to dealing with the visual medium, getting stuff out of somebody because they have an opinion, but you're really
Right.
not sure, like they don't know how to express it, and you have to try different ways of accessing that. And I think you beautifully describe that process. And sometimes it's a little bit like being a detective, right? It's like follow the clues, try to figure out the best you can to get to okay, here it is. This is really what we're talking about. And that certainly is a process. And I think from the outward, someone looking at the end product, they don't know any of that's happening, right? They don't know all that's
Right.
going into it. And so it's great to have conversations like this where we can elevate that and say, you know what? Yeah, that's why this is so important. That's why this isn't just somebody taking out an iPhone and going click and then, yeah, go on
Right.
with your day.
Well, it's in
Yeah.
effect developing a creative brief or being an agency for those who don't have any,
Hmm.
right? So it's kind of like figuring out what the thing is before you go to the thing, before you do the thing. And in fact, they feel more that alleviates some of the sort of stress of showing up because there's a plan. It's not like I don't know what's going to happen. This is crazy photographer. He's going to put me in traffic, and I don't know what's that kind of thing,
Yeah.
right? So there's I can certainly for events or for anything I can I've had assignments for music magazines where they say I have no idea what's going to happen. He could show up in the clown suit. He could be high off his kite and just do whatever, do whatever you can. Or events that, that you're documenting what's happening, but even covering an event, be it a corporate event, a nonprofit event, or a gala, I do take a strategic plan. There's a lot of planning that happens. What's the so-called run of show? What's going to happen during the event? And then really the question I'm always asking is, and that sort of puts event planners at back, and I say, well, what are the 5 photos that you want in the ideal world that you want to come out with at the end of this event?
Hmm.
And then from that, we build, okay, where do I have to be and when? Okay, you want someone by the speaker, like the keynote speaker, and you want a shot of that? Great. But you also want a wide shot? All right, so I need time to go back through the room, up, over to the auditorium, take the wide shot. Okay, come back down, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Instead of, being tapped on the shoulder saying, you got to go there now, like, okay. So having done it for a long time, you start to realize, the similar patterns emerge, and you want to definitely be like over deliver for your clients as much as possible, right?
Yeah.
Let me see. Yeah, so that's some of the creative. Going back to that cocktail party,
Hmm.
when people say, "What do you do?" I say, I photograph the why, not the what. I create images for, for corporations, nonprofits, and individuals, and sort of entrepreneurs. And I also cover events, and I do library shoots in which I develop a library of images for different needs. And then sort of for my personal work, as I'm documenting, this sort of ritual and festival and culture. And I'm on my second book, and I have exhibitions around the world. I have one in New York now, in Westchester County and Hastings-on-Hudson, which is closing May 19th. I will be there for that closing party in the afternoon. And I have one in Paris, and I just came from one in Germany. The work is going around, partially because my publisher is a decently well-known in the photo book world publisher called Gast in the UK. And I've had some decent PR with it as well, which is, like Wall Street Journal and The Guardian, and this photo blog called Lynn Scratch, which is pretty well known in the photography world, the fine art world. So it kind of cuts across a bunch of different type of genres of not just straight documentary, ethnographic, but edging into the fine art world as well. And it also tells a story.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've
So
got
a lot
your
of stuff going
bases
on. Yeah.
covered. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Man. Well, we're actually heading towards the top of our time, believe it or not. I mean,
Oh, wow.
there's such
Okay.
a wealth of experience you've had and things that you've documented and projects you've been involved in. Can you tell us a little bit about like where can people find you? How can they follow along? Where can they get your books?
Yeah, yeah, totally. My Instagram's at visual anthropology one, the number one. You can get my books on my website, jasongardner.net. or yeah, on the internet. I mean, also on Gost's website. I think it's gostbooks.com. But my website's preferred, but as you prefer. Um, there are three different types of cover of We the Spirits. That's the book number two. The book number one, A Flower in the Mouth, is exclusively on my site. Let's see. And from that, I mean, you can feel free to email me with any questions. I am not afraid of email, jason@jasongardner.net. Those are probably the best ways to get a hold of me. And those, you know, Instagram, my website, email, and kind of the online store. And I do sell fine art limited edition prints for those who are inspired. The ones are kind of for those who are watching. They're behind me, right there. In a few different sizes. And I do commissions, as they come up. And I'm back and forth. I'm in New York for like about a month around that exhibit and a few other commercial projects from mid-May to mid-June. I'm not sure when this is coming out, this podcast, but yeah, I like working on a variety amount of projects. Yeah, so pretty good.
Perfect. Yeah, yeah. I'll be sure to put some of those links in the show notes so people can click and find you
Thank you.
easily. And just in closing, I'd love to ask you one question. If
Yeah.
someone's listening right now and they're like in the beginning of their journey, they've got their creative outlet and the thing they're pursuing, and they're like, I want to lean into this and make this my business, make this my living. What's maybe one thing that someone either told you or one thing that you realized early on that really helped you stay the course?
Good question. I'm just sort of thinking about it. I'm
Hmm.
just trying to figure out if it's the creative side to stay the course or the business side to stay the course, right? So I'll answer that with one of each, right? Why not? The creative side is, which that's the gist of this podcast. So we'll kind of start with that. Is always be curious. Try not to say no that much. And if it's something like, if they say, can you shoot architecture? I usually am very honest. I say, I don't have a lot of experience,. But I'd like to give it a go. And then develop a community of support, be it like-minded artists, be it other photographers, designers, writers, whatever. Maybe they don't do the same thing you do, but can critique your work and meet on a monthly basis. Because, for example, in that architecture example, I said yes, and then I called up my architecture buddy saying, "Oh my God, I just said yes to this thing. What do I do?" I said, "Okay, don't worry. Figure out when the light is, get a tilt shift lens. Do that. These 5 steps." And so, for me, the community was really key, and running ideas off other people, and knowing that they had my back if I had a question, and likewise. Always stay curious, do a lot of work, and be consistent. Stay at it. Stick with it. You know. Um, on the business side, I guess from the marketing side, I was consistent in sending out an email to my list with updating with new projects every month or two, and that had a cumulative effect over time, such that some people who I hadn't met in 3 or 4 years or whatever, I run into them, a friend of a friend, they say, "Oh yeah, I've been seeing your things, come through." This is a little bit before social media. This is like when email newsletters were the only thing to get your thing out. Now it's just like you're just jamming all of it out there, and who knows what
Yeah.
happens. Let me see. Advice for people starting out, they have their creative vision, and they just have to figure out what's the best piece of advice. Um, I am on the fence. I'm a bit of a generalist. I mean, I have some things going on. I'm not doing everything, but I haven't focused on the one thing and done only that one thing. You could say as Carnival, but I have done a lot of corporate stuff too, and business stuff. So, but I would say, I think maybe it depends on the size of your market. If you're in a medium-sized city, then you can be more of a generalist. And if you're in a bigger market, it helps to be somewhat specialized, right?
Mhm.
So maybe evaluating where you're at, both in your career and geographically, and all that. And I only think in photography terms because largely with photography, not only, but largely you have to be there. But if you're, maybe you're a designer like yourself, you don't necessarily have to be there. So it's a different, factoring in the geography, if that is a factor, right? Um, and then it becomes a little bit of, I think the last thing I'd like to leave is when you evaluate a project, um, I think of like kind of the four F's or the five F's, four F's of like, would I do this, right? Fortune, fame, fun, fulfillment, right? It's kind of a little bit pithy, a little bit obvious, but fortune is money, fame is people going to know me, fun, do I enjoy it, or fulfillment, does it fulfill something deeper, like working for a nonprofit or helping a friend or whatever it may be, right? And if it doesn't have any of those, then you may consider not doing the project, right? And if it has multiple ones, you're laughing, right? So yeah, I still use that framework sometimes when I'm like, should I do this or not? That kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. Love it. Love it. Great advice.
Hope it
And
helps. Yeah, hope
I'm
it helps.
sure
Yeah.
I'm sure it's going to resonate with a lot of people listening. And thank you for sharing your work, your journey, this conversation today, and just giving that little glimpse into your world on some of the things that are happening, some of the thought processes, like the strategies, all that kind of stuff. I think that's super helpful to have these conversations to shed light on those things. So thank you today for this time.
No problem. Thank you, Mike. It was super fun.
Thanks for listening today. I'd appreciate it if you would subscribe, leave a rating and a review. It really helps this podcast be seen and heard by others.